Late afternoon enveloped the coast in darkness, leaving only the distant sounds of waves crashing on the shore. Somewhere in the distance, the light of a lighthouse flickered dimly, but the beach remained deserted and hidden from prying eyes. It was here, in the thick silence, that Mark and Jane finally met, as they had done many times before. Mark gently pulled Jane to him, his fingers gently touching her face, and his eyes full of mixed feelings, passion, fear, and perhaps remorse. They kissed, merging in a single impulse, as if they were trying to capture every moment of this oncoming fire that did not fit into the framework of their lives. Jane could feel how hard it was for him to breathe. He was still hesitating, caught between fear and desire. Their affair was more than just a secret. It was a threat to their worlds. And yet she reached for him again, her embrace warm and desperate. They pulled back, keeping a few steps of silence, as if afraid to break this fragile moment. Mark took a breath, trying to say something important, but his eyes betrayed all his doubts. "We can't do this anymore, Mark." Jane broke the silence, her voice trembling. She spoke as if releasing the pain and fear she had been carrying around for months. She was waiting for him to make a decision that wasn't there, and her words hung in the air like a threat. "Jane," Mark said, reaching out to touch her shoulder. "We can do this. We just have to be careful. No one can find out." He tried to convince both her and himself. He wasn't ready to break this bond, and could he? Jane had become his outlet, the light in a life that had long since lost its color. But he realized that Jane was tired, that her burden was different, heavier. "I can't hide anymore," she answered quietly. "I'm tired, Mark. I can't live a double life anymore." Her words cut through the air like a knife. Mark was silent, not knowing what to say. The feeling of uncertainty that hung between them was almost unbearable. He gently held her close, but she could already feel the weight of her decision. The lighthouse flashed again, illuminating their silhouettes, and then retreated into darkness again, hiding another secret kiss from the world. Mark Reynolds lived a half-century filled with achievements and disappointments, which have accumulated in the deep wrinkles on his face and invisible scars in his heart. He was a respected man in his small town, owner of a small construction company, sponsor of the local school, and even an honorary member of the Veterans Council. He had everything that could make a man his age happy and proud, but for some reason it seemed colorless. Life was going on as usual, not bringing him the lively energy that used to burn in him. Divorced for more than a decade, he was left alone in his large house. His only daughter, Donna, now a young adult, worked in a neighboring town and came home only on weekends, but she always tried to pay attention to him. Their relationship was warm, but Donna sometimes felt that her father was not telling her something, that there was some invisible wall between them. Donna had always admired her father, considering him an example of honesty and stability, and now she was beginning to worry about changes in his behavior. Recently, he had become more silent, spending more time alone, and when she tried to talk to him, he often looked away as if he was avoiding direct conversations. One day, she accidentally came across a photograph of her father and Jane Carter, her childhood friend, a young and ambitious student with whom they had once shared dreams and secrets. In the photo, her father and Jane were smiling at each other at a party. Donna didn't know how to interpret these signs, but something was bothering her. Jane Carter was an intelligent, cheerful, but a bit reserved girl. Difficult family relationships and constant financial problems left their mark on her character. Mark became someone she could confide in, someone who understood her and did not judge her. Moreover, he gave her a sense of security that she hadn't felt in a long time. Their relationship developed faster than either of them could have predicted. At first, Jane saw Mark as a wise mentor, someone who could give her advice and support. However, their meetings became more intimate, closer, and Jane began to notice that her heart fluttered every time she saw him. Mark, in turn, was also fascinated by her youthfulness and openness, by the fact that she seemed to revitalize him. But this intimacy was dangerous. Not only was Jane much younger than he was, she was a close friend of his daughter, and Mark realized that once this secret came out, his life would change forever. He was afraid of the moment when Donna would find out the truth. Mark tried to keep everything a secret, but at the same time he realized that he was losing control. His daughter started asking questions, looking at him with a look of suspicion, and although he continued to stubbornly hide behind a mask of restraint, he was torn apart by doubts. Donna couldn't find peace, either. She did not understand why her father had become so distant and why it hurt her so much to feel his indifference. She didn't know how close she was to the solution, but she felt that soon her life would change too, and this feeling never left her. Unspoken words, unbearable silence, and the shadow of suspicion accumulated in each of them, slowly wrapping their quiet lives in the darkness of secrets and alienation. Over the next few weeks, Donna felt more and more that her father was pulling away from her. Every time she tried to talk to him, Mark would answer with short, strained sentences or avoid the conversation altogether, pretending to be busy. He was spending more time away from home, which was unusual for her. Donna didn't understand what was going on, but she found it hard to ignore the feeling that her father was keeping a secret. Her suspicions grew, and one evening she decided to check his phone, which was left unattended on the living room table. When Donna picked it up, she saw that it was locked. This struck her as strange, because Mark had never locked his phone before. She decided she had no right to pry, but the feeling that he was hiding something kept coming back. Donna began to observe his behavior more closely. One evening, while they were having dinner together, she asked him about his life outside the house, trying to get some answers. "Dad, you've been so preoccupied lately. Is everything okay?" she asked, trying to sound casual, although her voice trembled with curiosity and anxiety. Mark stopped for a moment, his spoon hovering over his plate. He nodded hastily, not looking her in the eye. "Yes, of course, everything is fine," he replied briefly, then quickly changed the subject to talk about his work. But Donna wasn't satisfied with this answer. Her intuition told her that there was something much deeper behind these banal phrases. She remembered seeing Jane's photo on her father's phone a few months ago, and this detail began to give her some clues. She and Jane had often talked at the university, but lately her friend had been avoiding meetings and explaining that she had a lot to do. Something is not right, Donna thought, sinking deeper into her doubts. One day, when Donna decided to visit her father at work, she witnessed an unusual scene. As she entered the office, she saw her father quickly close his computer screen and stand up, averting his gaze from her. This seemed strange to her, because he had always greeted her warmly before, happy to see her. "Are you busy?" she asked, trying to hide the disappointment in her voice. "Yes, a little," he answered, again avoiding her gaze. "I can't talk long now, Donna. I have to finish something else. Perhaps later?" Donna nodded, keeping her face calm, but inside her doubts were growing. She could feel her father pulling away, and his silence was becoming an impenetrable wall between them. She wanted to find out the truth, to uncover his secrets, even if it would destroy what she had known about him all her life. That evening, Donna decided to write to Jane. She asked if she was okay, hinting that they hadn't had a chance to meet for a long time. The answer came almost immediately, but it was short and reserved. "Yes, everything is fine, just busy. I promise to see you soon." However, Donna sensed a falsity in Jane's words, as if she was hiding something important. She was sure that both Jane and her father were playing a game that Donna had trouble understanding. She felt as if there was a secret between them that was tearing their lives apart. Later that night, as she lay in the dark room, Donna felt every strange look and short answer her father gave her form a clear picture of suspicion. She decided that she would find out the truth, no matter how difficult it was. Late that evening, Mark sat in his office, looking at his watch. waiting for Jane. These meetings were his only solace in a routine and alienated life. Jane was the fire that made him feel that he was still alive, that he still had room for passion and desire. However, he couldn't ignore an uneasy feeling. The secret they were hiding from the world was becoming increasingly difficult for both of them. Jane came in a little later than usual, her face exhausted and her eyes betraying a deep fatigue, as if she were carrying an invisible burden inside her. Mark immediately noticed this and tried to cheer her up by hugging her and holding her close. "Jane, you look depressed," he said, leaning slightly toward her, trying to look into her eyes. She looked away for a moment and then took a deep breath, as if she were daring to take an important step. "Mark, we can't go on like this," she said. "I'm tormented by this secret. Donna doesn't know anything, but I can see her starting to suspect something. She asks me questions, tries to find out something, and every time she asks these questions, I feel like we're getting closer to failure." Mark was silent, not knowing what to say. He realized the risks of their relationship, but he wasn't ready to let her go. He had repeatedly convinced himself that he could control it, but now he saw his own stubbornness backfiring on them both. "You know I can't do this without you," he said softly, taking her hand. "Just a little patience and everything will be fine." But Jane slowly withdrew her hand, shaking her head. "No, Mark. I'm tired. I can't be a part of this lie anymore. It's not right. It's not right in front of Donna. It's not right in front of us. I feel guilty every time I look her in the eye." Mark felt panic grip him, hidden behind his usual mask of restraint. For the first time in their relationship, he realized that he might lose her. The thought was unbearable to him. "Jane, please." His voice became harder, almost imperious. "You can't just ruin everything. We have the right to be happy. We have the right to decide for ourselves what's best for us." Jane took a step back, surprised by his change in tone. She knew that his feelings for her were deep, but she hadn't realized that he was so dependent on the relationship. "Mark, I can't do this anymore," she said firmly. "I can't even imagine what would happen if Donna found out. And sooner or later, she will find out. We've already come too far." Mark was silent, clenching his fists. His face darkened with anger and despair. He was not ready for this. In his imagination, she was supposed to be there for him always, even in the face of all the difficulties. Her sudden resistance seemed like a betrayal. "You realize I can't just let you go," he finally said, his voice sounding hollow. Jane looked at him, not believing her ears. She felt herself being overwhelmed by fear, by waves of powerlessness and despair. She saw a man who no longer seemed like a reliable friend and support. His words sounded like a threat. She turned and quickly left, leaving him standing there, stunned and angry. This conversation changed everything. Now she knew that their affair had gone too far, that there was no way out, and she felt that this love would sooner or later destroy them both. The next few days were a real test for Jane. After a tense conversation with Mark, she felt that everything was about to spiral out of control. The unpredictability of his reaction frightened her, and she finally realized that this relationship had become a trap for her, and it was not easy to get out of it. She was torn by an internal conflict. On the one hand, she wanted to end this relationship and regain her peace of mind. On the other hand, she was afraid of the consequences. Meanwhile, Donna, unaware of the depth of the disagreement between her father and her friend, became increasingly interested in their strange behavior. She felt that something was changing, that the relationship between her father, and Jane was no longer as simple and open as it had been. This tension became an invisible wall that grew between them, and, unable to find an answer, Donna decided to approach Jane directly. One evening she called Jane and invited her to dinner at a cafe, knowing that in such a setting her friend would not be able to avoid a frank conversation. Jane, although nervous, agreed, realizing that she could no longer run away from responsibility. At dinner, Held in a cozy corner of a local restaurant, Donna began the conversation in a cautious tone, trying to find out what was bothering Jane and her father. "You've been different lately, Jane," she said quietly, looking into her friend's face. "And my dad. He's changed too. What's going on? I feel like I'm missing something important." Jane felt her heart clench with fear and guilt. She was afraid that the words she had been holding inside for so long were about to come out. Her hands began to tremble and she tried to hide it by picking up a cup of coffee. "Donna..." Jane tried to collect her thoughts, choosing her words. "It's just... I've been confused lately. Life has gotten more complicated, and I didn't want to worry you." But Donna wasn't satisfied with that answer. Her gaze was penetrating, and she continued to press, wanting to know the truth. "Doesn't this have anything to do with my father?" she asked, the words hanging in the air like a thunderbolt. Jane almost dropped the cup from her hand. She could see that Donna had almost arrived at the truth, even if she hadn't fully realized it yet. Uncertainty filled the space between them like an unbearable silence. No, of course not," Jane realized, barely able to say the words, trying her best to remain calm. But Donna could see through the lie. Her eyes narrowed, and she continued to stare at her friend. "I can tell there's something you're not telling me," Donna said, her voice filled with a cold tinge of distrust. Jane felt like she couldn't hold it in any longer. She wanted to tell Donna how she felt, how things had spun out of control, and how she had gotten herself into this trap. But Mark's face appeared before her eyes, his gaze full of determination, almost a power obsession. She realized that even if she told the truth, the consequences would be devastating for her, for Mark, and for Donna. "I'm really sorry," she whispered, wiping away the tears that had spontaneously appeared in her eyes. "But some things are better left a secret." These words only increased Donna's suspicions. She realized that she would have to find another way to get to the bottom of the truth if Jane wasn't ready to open up. She couldn't just let it go, feeling that something huge and irreparable was happening nearby. When they said goodbye, Jane saw a decision in Donna's eyes. Her friend no longer seemed naive and ready to accept her words without question. At that moment, she realized that their secrets could no longer remain hidden for long. Later, when she returned home, Jane felt an overwhelming sense of threat. She realized that it was only a matter of time before Donna found out the truth. That night, Jane decided that she would finally meet with Mark in the morning to discuss how they could resolve the situation. But she had no idea that this meeting would be the last of their lives. The rainy morning greeted Jane with gray unfriendliness, which shook her even more than the night's thoughts that had haunted her. She had arranged to meet Mark in a deserted parking lot outside of town, where they usually met to go unnoticed. Jane knew she couldn't keep this secret inside any longer. It was no longer just a burden, but a real danger to all their lives. Mark showed up as calm as ever, but his face was as gloomy as the clouds above their heads. He got out of the car, giving Jane a close look. She looked depressed, and he sensed that this conversation was going to be difficult. "Mark, we need to have a serious talk," Jane began, getting straight to the point. "I can't do this anymore. You have to understand. This is wrong. We're making it worse for everyone. I feel like I owe Donna. I can't do this anymore." Mark went pale for a second. He stared at Jane for a long time as if digesting her words, and suddenly his face became stern. He was not prepared for this development. This relationship was his only outlet, the one thing that made him feel as if he were still alive. He couldn't imagine it ending like this. "Jane, you have to understand." His voice was cold, and she felt an unusual hardness in it. "We've come too far to ruin it now. You can't just turn around and walk away as if nothing happened." Jane took a step back, startled by his tone. She knew Mark was attached to her, but she hadn't expected him to react so aggressively. Fear appeared in her eyes. "I'm not turning my back on you, Mark," she said, trying to stay calm. I'm tired of living a lie. Donna suspects everything, and it's only a matter of time before she finds out. We can't hide it anymore. Mark's frown deepened. He seemed to be seized with real rage. His breathing became labored, and he moved so close to her that Jane could feel his warmth, which now seemed uncomfortable and disturbing. Donna can't find out, he almost whispered, but his words sounded like an order. If you're her friend, you have no right to ruin her life because you have doubts. Jane shifted her gaze nervously. She no longer saw him as the man she had known before. Someone else stood in front of her, strange and scary. This new image of Mark made her feel very much in danger. Mark, I didn't mean for it to happen this way, but I can't live in this filth anymore, she almost screamed, finally daring to tell the truth. She has a right to know. These words seemed to blow up all his patience. Suddenly, he grabbed her arm, squeezing so hard that she could barely hold back a scream of pain. His eyes grew cold and indifferent, as if he no longer saw Jane in front of him, but only a threat. No, you won't do it, he whispered. You have no right to ruin my life. Jane tried to free herself, her heart pounding in panic, but Mark, overcome by his dark feelings, had already lost control. She tried to break free, but his grip was too tight. Panic and fear for her life were growing in her eyes, but he could no longer see it. He only saw his shattered illusion, his lost happiness, which was now disappearing because of her decision. In the heat of his rage, Mark didn't realize what he was doing. His arms slid around her neck, and the next moment everything went silent. The rain that had just begun poured down on them both, as if to erase the traces of their connection that had ended so tragically. Jane's body went limp in his arms. The reality of what had happened gradually crept into his mind like a shadow. Suddenly he felt himself overcome with horror, and the hands that had just held her so tightly now let go. Mark stepped back, looking at Jane, who was lying there motionless. His mind was racing, and panic was overwhelming him. He quickly looked around, realizing that everything was out of control, that there was no turning back, now. With cold calculation, he hurriedly began to cover his tracks, dragging her body away from the parking lot. He wanted to get rid of all the evidence, to leave it in the past, to hide a secret that should never have come out. The rain continued to fall, washing away the blood and tears that had become silent witnesses to this crime, finally hiding the last meeting between Mark and Jane from the world. Jane's body was found in the morning, 2 days later, in a wooded area near the river. She was discovered by a local fisherman who happened to stumble upon the deserted area where Mark hoped to hide the traces of his crime. The water had washed away much of the evidence, but some clues remained, and now the investigation had a difficult path to uncover the truth. The investigation was assigned to Detective Alex Smith, an experienced investigator known in the area for his ability to notice connections between small details invisible to others. Alex examined the crime scene very carefully, focusing on every detail. Although the rain had washed away most of the footprints, some of them remained. There were depressed sole prints and tire tracks on the ground that particularly interested him. Starting with the evidence collection, Alex noticed that there were subtle scratches under one of Jane's fingernails, probably made in the last moment of the struggle. He ordered a biomaterials analysis, hoping to get at least some clues. Pieces of tissue that could have belonged to the perpetrator were found near Jane's body, and this became an important new clue for further investigation. The detective also noticed footprints leading to an old parking lot on the outskirts of the city. Several witnesses mentioned seeing Jane in that area from time to time, which seemed suspicious to Alex, as it was not a place she often went for walks. After interviewing people who lived nearby, he learned that young people often used the parking lot as a place for secret meetings. But why was Jane there that night, in that weather? Alex decided to review her recent contacts and talk to her closest acquaintances. First, he visited the college where Jane had studied. It turned out that lately she had been looking confused and tired, avoiding her friends and often staying alone. Several of her classmates noted that Jane seemed to be hiding something, and her eyes were often red from crying. The next day, the detective went to meet Donna, who was not only Mark's daughter, but also Jane's closest friend. Donna was shocked by the news of her friend's death, and her reaction was sincere. During the conversation, she mentioned several times that in recent weeks, Jane had seemed restless, as if she was carrying some heavy secret. "I think she was seeing someone, but she didn't want to talk about it," Donna admitted, wiping away her tears. "And what's strange is, my father has been acting strange lately too. He was often moody and silent, and I didn't even recognize him sometimes." "Are you saying that your father knew Jane well?" Alex asked, feeling that this detail might be important. "She always said that my father was very nice and always supported her." Donna hesitated. "But lately I felt that something had changed between them." Alex wrote down everything she said without pretending that he was extremely interested in this information. When he returned to the station, he decided to examine Mark's daily routine in detail in the days before Jane's disappearance. It turned out that Mark could not give a clear explanation for his whereabouts on the night of the girl's disappearance. This suspiciously coincided with the time when Jane was last seen. When Alex decided to talk to Mark in person, he was surprised by the man's restraint and coolness. During the first interrogation, Mark kept an impenetrable face and tried to avoid answering direct questions about his relationship with Jane, although he assured that he treated her as a friend of his daughter. "I helped her with certain things from time to time," Mark answered, not looking the detective in the eye. "Did you ever meet with her alone?" Alex asked, noticing the subtle tension on Mark's face. "No, only with Donna present," Mark answered quickly, but his tone of voice showed nervousness. Alex noted in his notebook that this detail didn't match the witnesses who had seen Mark with Jane in the same parking lot where she appeared to frequent. Back in his office, the detective began analyzing the witnesses' statements and exploring all possible connections between Mark and Jane. In addition, he received the results of soil samples taken from the crime scene. Traces of dirt matched the samples found on the soles of the shoes Mark wore on the day of the interrogation. The next day, Alex went to Jane's college and asked to see the surveillance footage from the security cameras on the path leading to the parking lot. While reviewing the footage, he noticed that Mark's car had appeared twice near the college 2 days before she disappeared, even though he claimed he had no business in that part of town. This new information was an important clue, and Alex decided to gather additional evidence to confirm that Mark and Jane had a close relationship. He spoke to one of the employees of the cafe near the parking lot, who recalled seeing them together talking about something very intense. According to her, Jane looked confused and even scared, while Mark was persistent and seemed to keep his eyes on her. 35. Step by step, the puzzle was coming together. Alex did not yet have direct evidence that would point to Mark as the killer, but his suspicions were growing. He realized that the details he had collected were bringing him closer to the solution, and that the story was probably much more complicated than it seemed at first glance. Alex planned the next step, to find witnesses who could confirm the close relationship between Mark and Jane and make sure that his suspicions were not unfounded. He knew that there was still a lot to do before Mark could be formally charged, but he felt that this case was close to being over, and the truth would soon come out. Alex Smith spent the last few days carefully weighing all the evidence he had gathered. The deeper he delved into the case, the clearer he realized that Mark was the main suspect. Every fact he found, every small detail led to him like invisible threads connecting the criminal to the victim. After meeting with several witnesses, Alex received confirmation that Mark and Jane had a close relationship that went beyond the usual friendship. He was particularly interested in the testimony of a local cafe worker. She said she had seen Jane and Mark a few days before the girl disappeared. According to her, they were having a heated argument, and Jane looked confused and scared. Alex now had a more or less clear picture of what was going on between them. Alex decided to conduct a final interrogation with Mark to bring him to the cleaners. He invited him to the police station and, as always, calmly and composedly began asking questions. Mark again tried to keep his cool, but this time the detective was better prepared. "Mark," Alex began, looking him straight in the eye, "we found your car near where Jane disappeared the night she died. Perhaps you forgot to mention that you saw her that night?" Mark looked away, hesitated for a moment, and then answered sharply, "I told you, I didn't meet her alone. I only saw Donna, and then only very rarely." Alex picked up one of the folders and opened it, showing a photograph of the tire tracks found at the crime scene. "These tire tracks match those on your wheels. In addition, witnesses saw you with Jane at a local cafe a few days before she disappeared." Alex paused to let Mark think about the situation. "Do you want to explain why you withheld this information?" Mark rubbed his hands together nervously, his tension becoming more and more apparent. He was trying to think of something, but it was clear that he hadn't expected this kind of pressure. Alex watched his reaction in silence, knowing that this silence would make him even more nervous. "It was a terrible coincidence," Mark finally said, but his voice didn't sound as confident. "I didn't want people to misunderstand our relationship. I was just trying to help her, but Jane was a complicated girl." Alex listened intently, not interrupting, but he could sense that Mark was getting more and more confused by his own explanation. "You were helping her?" Alex repeated, leaning a little closer. "Weren't you helping yourself, Mark? We know you had a connection that you tried to hide, and it seems that Jane wanted to break it off. So maybe that's something you just couldn't accept?" Mark was silent, his eyes dropping again. He knew he was trapped. Every word he could say now would only confirm his guilt. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he whispered, lowering his head, his voice breaking in the silence of the room. She wanted to tell Donna everything. She left me no choice. This unexpected frankness was enough." Alex kept his eyes on him, but in his heart, he felt mixed emotions, victory and bitterness that this terrible truth had now been revealed. The next day, when Mark was already in custody, Alex returned to his office, tired and exhausted from the case. Solving the crime seemed like it should have brought him satisfaction, but instead he felt only emptiness. The story of Jane and Mark left a heavy imprint on his soul. He thought about how the small details, tire tracks, random testimonies, and forgotten conversations came together like a puzzle that fully revealed a story of love, obsession, and fear of the truth. Alex could not stop thinking about how one wrong choice, one person who lost control of his feelings, changed the fate of two families. The trial of Mark Reynolds became a central event for the small town. Everyone who knew Mark as a respectable businessman and father could not believe that his outward confidence and friendliness hid a dark history. Now that the truth about his secret affair with Jane and the circumstances of her death have come to light, people reacted differently to this tragedy. Some sympathized, while others condemned him for his actions. During the trial, the prosecutor described in detail the development of the relationship between Mark and Jane, which initially looked like friendly support, but turned into an affair full of tension and hidden risks. The prosecutor noted that Mark, not wanting to lose Jane and trying to control her, brought the situation to a tragic end. He was accused of premeditated murder with a motive that arose from personal drama and the threat of his secret life being revealed. In his testimony, Mark admitted to a relationship with Jane, but denied that he had planned the murder. His defense lawyer tried to present the case as a tragedy of an accidental incident, arguing that his actions were reckless, but not intentional. According to the lawyer, Mark did not want to kill Jane. It was an impulsive act caused by fear and emotional breakdown. During the trial, the prosecutor referred to the evidence he had collected: traces at the crime scene, witness statements, and personal messages between Mark and Jane, which confirmed their connection and tension in the days before her death. After a lengthy hearing, the court delivered its verdict. Mark was found guilty of premeditated murder and sentenced to 10 years in prison. The judge took into account the circumstances of the case, as well as the fact that the crime was committed against a background of emotional distress. Several months have passed since the trial ended. The town, which had once been abuzz with rumors and speculation, gradually returned to normal life, trying to erase this dark page from its memory. But for those who were most affected by this story, a return to normalcy was unattainable. Donna left her parents' home and moved to another city. She couldn't stay in a place where every street reminded her of betrayal and pain. Life seemed to her to be full of emptiness, and although she tried to build a new reality, heavy thoughts and memories of the events did not let her go. She blamed herself for a long time, believing that she could have noticed something earlier, could have stopped what had happened. Her days were spent in the shadow of heavy thoughts, and only time promised her healing. Mark Reynolds spent his days in his cell, staring at the walls that seemed to him a prison of his own decisions and mistakes. The long hours of solitude slowly revealed the depth of his guilt, but his remorse did not bring relief. Every day for him was an echo of the losses, belated realizations, and pain he had caused not only Jane, but also his own daughter. Life returned to its normal course, but each of the characters in this story remained forever changed by it. The truth came to the surface, bringing relief to justice, but leaving a deep mark on the hearts of those who learned the hard way that sometimes secrets can come at a high price.